Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. The world mourns the passing of Pope Francis. We're recording this on Saturday, April 26, and earlier this morning, the funeral of the Pope took place. He was laid to rest. We extend our condolences to all of our Catholic friends and Catholics everywhere, including the worldwide Armenian Catholic community. Catholicus of all Armenians, Garekintu, and Catholicus of the Great House of Cilicia, Aram I, were both in attendance, as was the president of Armenia, Hadjian.
It is a time of sorrow, yet even in mourning, we have the duty to confront uncomfortable truths about the Vatican and their recent actions towards Armenia and Christian Armenians. In April, the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome hosted a conference titled Christianity in Azerbaijan, History and Modernity. On its face, it sounded like an academic event, but in reality, it was anything but. So this is going to be our discussion today.
Yeah. We are joined by Avedis Hadjian, a journalist and co-author of a letter signed by over 350 scholars condemning the Vatican's collaboration with Azerbaijan, and Dr. Vartan Matiossian, a historian and executive director of the Eastern Prelacy of the Armenian Apostolic Church of New York. And he is the co-author of the letter, and he's also an author of many books.
So before we bring in our guests, and this is going to be a really exciting discussion, I wanted to give a quick note to our listeners. If you enjoy the show and want to keep these conversations going, you can support us at podcasts.groong.org/donate. All the donations count, and it really helps us just increase our reach. So if you're there, you can buy us a coffee, a 10, 20, whatever your pocketbook allows.
Of course, if buying us a coffee is not in your budget, that is not a problem. You can still comment on our shows. You can go to YouTube. You can go to Substack. You can retweet us. You can like. You can share our shows. All of these activities help our visibility on those social media platforms, and they help us. So it's not just money that will help us. The visibility will help get our message across as well.
And then if you do that, you can brag that you were following us before it was cool to do so. Thank you for being part of our community.
Yeah. On with the show.
Now, on with the show.
Mr. Hadjian, Dr. Matiossian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
In 2016, Armenians welcomed Pope Francis warmly when he visited Armenia, laid flowers at the Armenian Genocide Memorial, and called Armenia the first Christian nation. That was a very impressionable, I think, trip for all Armenians worldwide. And then his visit was preceded by years of warming ties between the Catholic and the Armenian Apostolic Churches. It was highlighted by his proclamation of Saint Gregory of Narek as Doctor of the Church during the 2015 centenary of the Armenian Genocide. So Saint Narek is actually a saint of the Catholic Church as well. Today, however, Armenians have a different image of Pope Francis, the one of him posing with Ilham Aliyev, the butcher of Baku, whose regime wiped out Christian Armenians in Artsakh and is now working towards essentially capturing and threatening the rest of Armenia itself. How did it come to this point? This is the focus of our discussion today. Earlier this month, on April 10, the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome hosted a conference that few people were invited to or knew about, titled Christianity in Azerbaijan, History and Modernity, and financed by the Azerbaijani government. It was a classic campaign designed to whitewash its record of ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. No Armenian historians, as I said, were present. No alternative views were presented or tolerated. Vatican and Azerbaijani flags stood side by side, creating an undeniable impression of official approval. Despite multiple church officials being in attendance, the church apparently made the excuse that it was simply renting the hall and was not endorsing the content. To be fair, Pope Francis was very ill during the last 2-3 months of his life and spent much of it in hospital. So this is not as much a reflection on him, but Vatican in general. Regardless, the question remains, because this conference didn't happen in a vacuum. Over the past decade, the Vatican has quietly developed a cozy relationship with the Azerbaijani dictator, and Mehriban Aliyeva, Ilham Aliyev's wife, and the country's vice president, by the way, was awarded Vatican's highest honor for laypersons. Donations flowed, photos were taken, honors were exchanged. Avedis, let's begin with you. You co-authored a letter publicly condemning Vatican's actions that got the signature of over 350 scholars, including Professor Matiossian here. What prompted you to take this step?
Well, obviously, it was how flagrant this image or the impression created of collusion between the Vatican and the negationist discourse of the Azerbaijani regime, appropriating our church's history and heritage. So that was outrageous, and that triggered, I think, this campaign of writing a petition to declare Cardinal Gugerotti, and that's why it was most offensive, because he's an Armenologist, he's an expert in Armenian studies, who's had the honor of having Professor and Archbishop Levon Zekian as his teacher, and who's versed in Armenian history and culture and language. As far as I know, I've never heard him speak, but I'm told he speaks Armenian fluently. I don't know that for certain, because I've never heard him speak, I've never met him. So him claiming, even if it's just a paragraph, even if it's just a few lines, that the Christian culture in Azerbaijan is based on the Albanian church's history, first is a blatant fabrication, and second, it's offensive because it contributes to fostering the cultural genocide that Azerbaijan is pursuing, in addition to, a full-fledged genocide, massacring people and driving them away from their historical lands, as they just did in Artsakh. So all that coming together was extremely offensive, and somebody should have stood up to that. And I think we did.
Professor Matiossian, your thoughts?
Let's note also, which is not something that has been very noticed, that this conference, according to the poster that I saw, it said that it was number 12 of a series, Azerbaijan and Christianity, or whatever was the title exactly at this moment, which I understand that there should have been 11 other conferences of the same subject, most likely in Baku. So this is a kind of an export of Azerbaijani denialism into the West, organizing the same conference with the same topic, this time in the Vatican. So it was natural that only people, Azerbaijani or pro-Azerbaijani scholars and so-called scholars, would be invited to this conference, the one in the Vatican, because the same naturally happened with those held in Baku. So there is nothing strange about that. This was a closed doors conference, as I understand, where there was no need for invite. There was no need for last minute, for even a piece of news, as it usually happens with many of these kind of conferences, which are not normally publicized at all, or in a very, very restricted circle. So that was, at least to me, it wasn't surprising, because it was the practice, standard practice with a certain type of scholarly conference. Not every conference becomes, a public one where you expect 100 or 200 or 300 people to attend, etc., etc. So the shocking part was not only to be held in an institution related to the Vatican, but official involvement of the Vatican throughout the messages from its officials. That was the shocking part. If the conference had been held in the same university and they had just rented a room, even if they put or not put the two flags, that wouldn't have been a very much of a problem. The problem comes when there is a certain level of Vatican involvement into that, even if it's just a message, which could be, stereotypical message, but it's stereotypical or not, it contained a few words that were offensive enough.
So was there any dialogue attempted between with the Vatican officials before the letter was sent, or do you think that the situation was beyond diplomacy already?
It was. Well, let me clarify a couple of points here. I think both Vartan and myself but I'm talking about myself here. I think everybody in society has their own role. I'm not a diplomat. I'm a writer and a journalist. And it's in that capacity that I co-authored and I signed the letter, not as a diplomat. Yet, just to give you the context, and I think that's helpful, by pure chance, 2 weeks before this conference, I had written to Cardinal Gugerotti, whom I don't know personally, because I was writing an article on I wanted to write an article on the Mkhitarist congregation, about its future, its plans. And the monks here at St. Lazarus told me to approach the prefect for the dicastery for Oriental Churches, Cardinal Gugerotti, who's an Armenologist, and who is generally held in high esteem by Armenian churchmen and Armenian officials as well, and experts too. He has many friends and people who are still shocked by his words of congratulations to these organizers of this conference. And he declined to respond to this silly question. Well, even if you don't call it silly, it was a regular article saying the Mkhitarist congregation that's been in Venice for over 3 centuries is looking forward to a future of growth and new initiatives that promote the Armenian culture and language, still serving as a bridge between the Armenian nation and Rome, or something like that. So I was expecting, a pro forma, a kind of conventional quote from Cardinal Gugerotti, nothing else. So it was a typical letter that you send to an official saying, and more or less this is what I wrote. Your Excellency, I'm writing an article about the Mkhitarist congregation, and you, as a noted Armenologist, your thoughts would be appreciated. Something like that. Nothing else. It was a couple of sentences. And he declined. And he declined through his secretary, saying that given the delicacy of the moment, that's the word he used, and that was way before, 2 weeks before the conference, about which nobody knew anything, nobody outside the organizers, including the Vatican, who probably already knew. I assume Cardinal Gugerotti already knew, so he declined. And I didn't ask him about Azerbaijan or anything. But I was surprised, and I got a little upset, and I followed up with another message asking Cardinal Gugerotti, well, that's disappointing. I don't know. I don't really recall exactly what I told him, but I told him I don't know what's this delicacy about, why the situation is so delicate. I don't know what you're referring to. And I said, the Armenian public would appreciate your thoughts about not only the Mkhitarist congregation, but also about the increasing coziness between Vatican and Azerbaijan that's been bankrolling so many projects in the Vatican. Obviously, I got no answer for that. So that was the context. And then out of the blue, as everybody else, on April the 9th, we saw these images of the pamphlet or the flyer of this stupid conference in Rome circulating online. And we were shocked, but we were even more shocked when we read that the Vatican, as Vartan hinted before, had sanctioned this conference by sending congratulatory messages. But even if you are generous, and even if you are a practical person and rational and assume that is in the circumstances, you do behave diplomatically and assume that the Vatican, besides being a holy see of the Catholic Church, is also a state that perforce needs to have diplomatic relations, even with unpleasant regimes like the genocidal one of Ilham Aliyev and his wife and his cronies in Azerbaijan. Even assuming all of that, there was absolutely no need by an Armenologist like Cardinal Gugerotti, who has been to Armenia many times, who has been to the Genocide Memorial in the Dernagapert, who has laid, as I believe, wreath there in the memory of our martyrs, to claim that the churches and the cultural heritage that Azerbaijan has appropriated in the occupied territories of Artsakh and also Nakhichevan, where they destroyed over 10,000 Khachkars in Julfa, are Albanian heritage, which is part of the negationist and genocidal discourse of the regime. So that's why it was so outrageous. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, that's
that kind of provides the context of what happened before, but it had nothing to do. Nobody knew about this conference, and I wasn't expecting it.
That's an interesting point, because when this conference originally happened, I asked some Catholics about why there is no official voice of indignation from the Armenian Catholic Church as well. And I was told that it's a very delicate situation because they're trying to actually keep their Mkhitarist order as well. And that was also echoed by our last guest on our podcast, who said that sadly the Catholic Church has seems to have a policy of cannibalizing the Armenian churches. So actually, I wanted to ask, is this issue simply associated with corruption, or is there a more deep-rooted policy that is being pursued, in your opinion?
I can't discuss things I don't know about. I mean, I don't know what's at stake, but what I say is enough for me to make some educated guesses. But if I see that Azerbaijan is funneling millions and millions to the Vatican for restoring marbles and walls and sculptures and things like that, works of art and churches of all places in Rome, then I assume, okay, well, that's what they're expecting in return. They're expecting a letter from Cardinal Gugerotti saying that the churches that they have just now taken over in our occupied lands are Albanian heritage. And he's willingly being complicit in the discourse without any need. He could have sent a note to that conference, which is offensive in itself because it is an act of cultural genocide anyway. So without Gugerotti's message, it would have been justified. I mean, our letter, the letter that we co-signed and co-authored, would have been justified regardless. But adding insult to injury in his salutation, mentioning that Albanian church's paragraph was what took this to another level, he could have sent a note saying, we wish you a successful conference, and we wish that this contributes to world peace, or whatever you say in the circumstances. I'm not a diplomat, I'm a journalist. But, I assume that you have to do certain things that are unpleasant, you hold your nose and you do them. But to add that paragraph was what was so outrageous. It's an element of flagrant and obvious and direct complicity in the genocidal discourse of Azerbaijan,
Right.
of fabrications and falsity.
Professor Matiossian, do you have anything to add to this?
Probably, yes, a couple of things. The first one, I don't know if it was more outrageous, the mention of Caucasian Albania in that context, or talking about Azerbaijan as a sort of island of tolerance, religious tolerance, and multicultural relations. Those two were the main conducting lines in Cardinal Gugerotti's message. So, which was more outrageous? I am not sure. It's part of a point of view. My second point is about a little more context, something that I remember this moment when Avedis was talking. In 2018, I visited Rome for the second time, and I had never been before to Villa Borghese. And in Villa Borghese at that time, there was already a statue of Nizami, the great Persian poet, which had been financed by the government of Azerbaijan, which has all the time has been claiming that Nizami was an Azerbaijani poet because he was actually born in Ganja, which means Ganzak, the Armenian city of Ganzak, in lower Artsakh. And a while after my visit, the statue of Hovhannes Tumanyan was also placed there by the efforts of the Armenian government. What I mean is that this policy of Azerbaijan of approaching the Vatican and funneling money for this or that purpose is, of course, part of a much wider strategy. And it's a strategy that also encompasses Italy, which is the neighbor country, so to speak, or if you say Rome, the neighbor city to the Vatican, or the city where the Vatican is placed.
Yeah. Yeah, there are very big arms weapons deals between Azerbaijan and Rome, including fighter jets and so forth. So
Yes,
yes.
I have heard of that. Not that I am very knowledgeable about the details, but I just wanted to go into the sort of cultural aspect or the soft diplomacy of this subject, because that cultural part is what gives you more ideas for a quid pro quo, which is different from necessarily political concessions or weapon or military relations, etc. This is just, the softest part of it. It's just cultural relations. So I do something for you, so you do something for me in the cultural field. So this is a case of that, where they have help with millions of dollars, and then they just ask for a little message where you put your few lines, or we draft for you a message and you put a signature, which is not impossible that it is what happened. I wouldn't discard that really that letter was ghostwritten by any Azerbaijani official. I cannot say so, but I am free to assume that.
Did they actually use the phrase "an island of tolerance"?
No. I just paraphrased. I
Okay,
don't have the
but
It's whatever they said is in the
yeah.
letter, so you can read it there.
they use
I
they
can
use
look it up myself. Just
Yeah, I mean it's obviously it's consistent with Azerbaijani propaganda, and yeah, I have to add, like I'm my indignation and I mean many Armenians' indignation, but the fact that there's zero Armenians in Artsakh, they're wandering homeless in Armenia or have emigrated, and this just does not make any sense why this
so this is the paragraph we're discussing. Azerbaijan, the crossroads of peoples and faiths, is an ancient land on which a Christian tradition was preserved that has its roots in the era of Caucasian Albania. Cardinal Gugerotti wrote, the sacred monuments, churches, manuscripts, and memories of the whole represent not only artistic testimonies, but tangible expressions of the soul of a people who knew how to honor God in a variety of forms and in the faithfulness of their faith.
And let me just add that there's, I believe, video or photographic evidence of Aliyev ordering his minions to erase Armenian language inscriptions on Armenian churches in Artsakh, saying, this shouldn't be there. This is not an Armenian church. Why is Armenian language, and it's like ancient, carvings on the church. And they're saying, this is all happening in the open. It's not even being hidden.
They're
Whereas,
proud of it.
yeah.
I think that Cardinal Gugerotti must have been sleeping under a rock for the last 5 or 6 years. Professor Matiossian, I want to ask, given what you said about the relationship between Azerbaijan, the Vatican, and in the context of Italy and Azerbaijan relations, military relations, what does this mean for Christian communities who still look to the Vatican for moral leadership when it seems to me that the Vatican has essentially abdicated that moral leadership?
I am no expert in Vatican history, but there have been several moments in Vatican's history where its moral role and moral guidance has been put in doubt. And there are episodes, past and not so past, where the leading by example that the Catholic Church, and any church, by the way, should offer, has been put in doubt. I don't need to dwell into the details. So that moral guidance could always be a little suspect, especially in this world of today, where we see at every moment how morality is being thrown aside in the name of whatever else is more important than the morals. This is a very disgraceful case. And of course, one could say that the Vatican, having resources that they have, much bigger resources like, let's say, the Armenian Church, why did they need the money coming for culture, for building restorations and the like, coming from an Islamic state?
Right.
It doesn't matter whatever context you give to the word Islamic. There is not important. It's not a state where Christianity is the official religion. So what was the point of that? What is that the Vatican is just saving its resources for a rainy day and saying, okay, because they are offering me the money, this is good for me, and then I can give something in exchange or not, but most likely I will. So that's the part that is more problematic. I mean, you could give me an David's advocate argument and tell me, hey, but there was that sheikh a few years ago who helped restore the church in Hadjian in Armenia, and he wasn't a Christian. Okay, I understand that, but the sheikh didn't ask for anything, and he wasn't the let's say the prime minister of the United Emirates or something, and we haven't seen a quid pro quo in that case in particular, for instance. So going back to your question, at least probably Christians should take this kind of moral guidance with a little more suspicion, unfortunately, and hopefully there will be some kind of even though I'm quite skeptical about it, hopefully there will be some kind of clarification to this episode.
It's going to be kind of tough, especially since there will be a succession topic in the Vatican, of course.
I just need to add, I think Professor Matiossian, you were very diplomatic about this, but on the point of moral leadership, Larry C. Johnson, who has been a guest of our podcast before and is a frequent sort of a talking head on various media, he has written an article about the Catholic Church's complicity and collaboration with Nazi Germany, and even after World War II, helping various Nazi officials escape, Germany. So I think that should not be, without mention here in this context, and also the argument that the Catholic Church needs money. I mean, there are some estimates that say that the Catholic Church is the richest institution in the entire world, based on the.
That's why I said that they don't need the money necessarily. I don't know what they have, but I know that they are not a poor church.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even beyond churches. I think that when you compare among corporations and things like that, I saw this estimate that Catholic Church has more assets than anyone else. So anyway, just a point that should be mentioned.
Yeah. So I just want to bring in that, as Hovik mentioned a little bit earlier, this is not this event was not just a one-off event. It's part of a coordinated, pervasive campaign on the part of Azerbaijan to erase history, and also Armenians from the map of the region. Why are religious institutions such an important target of Azerbaijan's authoritarian propaganda?
In this case, I believe it is obvious. The Catholic Church, being the biggest Christian church in the world and having a state of its own, It's a kind of natural target. And of course, you can say that, well, in Europe, the Catholicism is in kind of a retreat, or, secularism is on the advance, etc., but not necessarily in the rest of the world. And I don't know about the numbers in Europe either necessarily, but whatever influence the Catholic Church has in the world, it is important for Azerbaijan to do that, because it's more a matter of internal consumption. The Aliyev regime puts out a picture of the two flags together in an institution related to the Vatican, and they say, okay, the Vatican co-organized the conference. They can say that. We have enough experience with Turkish denialism to know that this is the most natural thing to happen, to spin, and spinning the reality for political reasons is not so only an Azerbaijani or Turkish thing. We all know that. So this has two different fronts, I believe. The matter of internal consumption in the country, which is of course important for the Aliyev regime, and of course whatever profit they can take on the external front, which can be, and this establishes also a pattern for future attempts here or there. We had this conference in the Vatican, and this at that time, and we want to have the 13th in Hamburg, for instance, or Madrid, or wherever. Why not?
Okay. Well, let me turn my attention to Armenia's state response for a moment. While all this has been going on, Armenia's official response has been very, very muted. Beyond a few polite diplomatic notes, Yerevan has failed to mount a serious protest. There was no public campaign to correct this narrative. No diplomatic pressure has been applied to either Italy or Vatican or anywhere. No coordinated effort from Armenian cultural institutions or media to highlight the scandal. This passive stance sends a dangerous message, not just to Azerbaijan, but to the entire international community. If Armenia will not defend its own history, who will? Avedis, what are your thoughts about this? Why has Armenia failed to respond forcefully to these attacks on our heritage?
Again, that's something I don't know anything about. I know a lot of diplomacy, as Vartan mentioned before, happens in the background. What I've learned is that Armenia and the Armenian state and the Armenian government and the Armenian officials get a bad rap, mostly from Armenians in the diaspora. And I honestly don't think that's always fair. I think Armenia as a state has faced, for all its failings, has responded to extreme challenges that would defy bigger and more powerful countries with a more established diplomatic service. And when I say more established, I mean in terms of time. And I think the Armenian diplomacy has always responded very well. So I don't know what's going on in the background. I think the embarrassment the Vatican has brought upon itself is big enough for the Armenian state just to shrug it off and show more nobility than the Vatican has displayed. And I also believe that Azerbaijan's campaign to buy Vatican's favors are to just gain moral sanction for its genocidal deeds. And that's why this conference was particularly outrageous, doubly so because of Cardinal Gugerotti's blessing. I think we are going more generally through a dark time in history, not only in Vatican history, but generally in history in the world. It's obviously a very complex situation that exceeds the scope of this conversation and obviously my capacity to analyze it. But there seems to be a correlation in history. If you read it more carefully, there seems to be a certain correlation between technological progress and moral disruption, as we are seeing now. There's a phrase that sums it up very well that's attributed to Gramsci, but which actually is a very liberal, a very free translation and reinterpretation by a Slovenian philosopher called Slavoj Žižek. And the phrase is this: the old world is not dying yet, and the new world is not being born. This is the time of the monsters. And he wrote that, I think 10 or 20 years before World War I broke out, which brought out the first batch of monsters in the 20th century. We know it very well. That's when our genocide happened. And I think the Vatican, once again, in this climate of amorality, of complete moral bankruptcy, is abdicating its principles for the sake of realpolitik and expedient policy making, which is the case in its relations with the genocidal country, and blatantly so, like Azerbaijan. But when that happens in the context of other genocides that are happening right before our eyes, being normalized and justified and being shrugged off by the leadership and by the leaderships of so many countries that are democratic and that are based on the values upon which the post-war world order was based, then what can you expect from the Vatican? What you can expect from the Vatican is precisely what Azerbaijan is craving, is its moral authority. You know the phrase attributed to Stalin that in response, I don't know if the story is true, it's probably false, but it illustrates the point. I think the Pope had criticized Stalin, and Stalin had responded, ironically, how many divisions does the Pope have? The Vatican no longer has military might, no longer has political might, or so it might seem. But look at the attention that the death and the naming, the appointment of a new Pope generates worldwide. Look at how many leaders congregate together in a place where they normally wouldn't see each other just because the Pope passed away. That conveys the point about the high moral authority that still the Vatican retains. And that's what Azerbaijan is paying for. And the Vatican is giving in. It's paying a moral price. I don't know about Pius XII, but obviously it's a dark chapter in the history of the Holy See. What I read is that his legacy is more mixed. Even in Polish historiography, Pius XII is remembered more ambiguously in the sense that Poles, a very Catholic nation, even more so before the war, he couldn't do anything to save them from the Nazis, despite his efforts. So the evidence, according to what I read in my readings on that topic, I'm not a Vatican expert, not by far, are very limited, but the evidence apparently on that score is mixed. But in this case, it's very blatant what we're seeing.
Yeah, Avedis, I know what you're saying, that a lot of diplomatic efforts happen behind the closed doors, but when there is no response from the Armenian government, people like you and me, the common folks, are left wondering if this is a show of weakness and whether that stems from strategic miscalculations, or how much of it is from internal dysfunction, especially at a time when we here in the diaspora clearly feel that the Armenian government is almost afraid of commemorating the Armenian genocide and calling the genocide a genocide.
And not just in the diaspora.
Thank you. Vartan, what are your thoughts about this? Is this any kind of a show of weakness, and where is that coming from?
It's not totally unlikely that the Armenian government has chosen to do whatever they do behind behind the curtains, that's a possibility. But of course, some kind of a public response, even a diplomatic, polite one, should have been granted, at least not to be, when the heads of the Armenian Church go on record excoriating the conference and Azerbaijani denialism. It sounds strange that the Armenian state keeps mum about it. So some kind of response would have been warranted, even though I understand that the Armenian government or the Armenian state being in a relatively weak position vis-a-vis Azerbaijan after 2020 does not have a very big space to maneuver, and sometimes to say things or to do things that in a different context should have been or would have been done. But again, possibly there should have been some sort of a public response, even if a muted one or a polite one, so to speak, even saying something without saying anything. It's quite interesting. Someone could be too cynical and say it's not totally unexpected that they would do nothing, but I'm trying to be fair on this and try to see whether there is room to discuss both sides of the coin, so to speak.
All right. Well, this has been an interesting discussion, and as we're nearing the end, I wanted to ask our participants if there are any additional thoughts you have that you could share with our listeners.
Yeah, I would like to go back to the question of Armenia not responding. I don't know why it didn't respond. My assumption, knowing Armenian diplomats and knowing how more or less it works, more or less just from the outside as a journalist, I want to assume that they probably had a reason. The other thing I wanted to say is, again, we are all very unhappy with what happened in 2020, and then the ethnic cleansing of the Artsakh in 2 years ago. One thing that has always intrigued me as a journalist has been how decision-making is made in high positions of power. And that's a question I generally ask whenever I can to former heads of a state. The responses vary, but it comes down to this. It's more or less, and this is surprising, but more or less what you see is what you get. What you read in the newspapers is what these people who take big decisions because they have the big toys, they have the big weapons, are basing these decisions upon. It's on what you're reading in the newspapers. And one thing I know for sure is that it's really not for the Vatican, but for Armenia, a very delicate moment. And if very difficult decisions have to be made by the government in order to save what can be saved, and that these aren't palatable for the Armenian public, whether in the diaspora or in Armenia, then so be it. I am trying to be rational here. And Vartan knows me well. We are friends at least since we were teenagers, but since our childhood. Since mine, at least. Vartan was already a teenager when I was a child, but still, I'm not generally a person who's shy about expressing his emotions, and I have very strong emotions about Turkey and about Azerbaijan and about their genocidal deeds and their criminal past and criminal present. Having said that, I respect and I feel all of respect for people who are doing their best to save Armenia and Armenian statehood in these very difficult times, which can compromise both. We don't have all the elements to judge what's going on. I don't have them, at least. I don't have the information. But I'm gathering that a country that for a long time was able to defend its stance regarding Artsakh, look at it from the international perspective. That's not mine as an Armenian. Let me repeat that and make it very clear. From the perspective of international law, Armenia was occupying sovereign territory that belonged to Azerbaijan. For 30 years, Armenia's, the Republic of Armenia's very capable diplomatic service and its government was able to fend off diplomatic efforts against Armenia and Artsakh Armenia for occupying a territory that amounted to more or less 40% of the surface of Armenia. There are only two countries in the world, to the best of my knowledge, that are able to hold on to territory illegitimately occupied. One is Israel, and the other one is Turkey in northern Cyprus. So Armenia, little Armenia, punched well above its size for 3 decades, and that's no small feat. I would like to believe that there are very good reasons for its response now. And let me add one more thought, and I stop here. Both Armenian Holy Sees and the Patriarchate of Jerusalem gave very forceful responses to something organized by the Holy See, and that was very appropriate and to the point.
Okay, I just want to clarify. I don't want to belabor this point, but you mentioned from the perspective of international law, and I think that we should mention that that is a debatable point, because from the perspective of international law, Armenia has for all this time been defending the right of self-determination, not territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, and the question of territorial integrity is a debatable point in itself. So we should not
fair point.
Thank
you.
And also, I want to add the fact that Armenia had forces to defend its brethren in Artsakh. We have seen what happened without that support. You know, there has been genocide that was committed. Yeah. And so if you want to say that, for example, we were occupying, which I don't agree with, we were occupying that territory, not occupying meant genocide, which is the correct way to go about this.
No. Let me clarify once again. I don't want this to be misquoted or misinterpreted. I was saying from an international perspective, that's how it was labeled. It's a very good point you brought up, Hovig. At the time when the Soviet Union collapsed, there were two principles that were at stake: self-determination or territorial integrity. Unfortunately for us, in the case of Artsakh, the principle of territorial integrity in international polity prevailed. That's not what I think as an Armenian, as a patriotic Armenian, as someone who's devoted to the Armenian cause since I have memory. So that's not what I was saying, that we are an occupying force. I was trying to portray the challenges our diplomatic service.
Yeah, that was the accusation by Azerbaijan for many years.
Exactly. Yes. So by Azerbaijan and their allies too. They're very powerful allies that sell them weapons, including the country where I live now.
Yes.
So that was my point, that our diplomatic service and our country and our state defended our interests very well, punching well above its weight.
I think that with due respect to our guests and Avedis, I truly respect you and thank you for coming. I do want to add that, yes, we don't have all the information that happened, but we have a lot of information that for many years the current government, the current de facto regime in Armenia, and I'll say that's my subjective opinion in deference to our guests, has been writing and talking about geopolitical changes. And maybe that'll lead to, the next question that Asmed wants to ask, but it was a very dire geopolitical change from going, from north-south to east-west in terms of alliances. And we have to be frank. I mean, Pashinyan has been for decades slamming the Artsakhtsis, fostering anti-Artsakhtsi hate. So when we give them the benefit of the doubt, let's also mention that he has been fostering hate, and even today he's doing that. So I don't buy the argument that they're doing their best. And in fact, there is an argument to be made that they're complicit with Aliyev on this.
I want to hear Vartan's final thoughts on the issue of the Vatican thing. Also, one thing that was mentioned in the letter, Vartan, there were some calls for the Armenian Church to react. I wanted to know how the Armenian Apostolic Church should react to this, and what kind of reaction we have seen so far.
The reaction we have seen is the letters that Avedis mentioned, the letters from the Catholicoi and the Patriarch of Jerusalem. I don't think that that reaction will go further, because there is no need to go further necessarily in that regard. Of course, the call for persona non grata, etc., was not meant to be necessarily or to have a follow-up, because we understand that it's not easy to do it. But at least it was a way to plant the issue that comes with personal responsibility in what happened. So if people are ready to wash their hands and saying that, oh, I was following orders or whatever, then at least we want them to know that we are not pleased with what they did. And this was a way I believe, for the signatories, because the signatories, of course, brought their signatures by their own accord, that they saw that and they agreed with that. I would love to hear, I know that there is not going to happen, but I would love to hear what, for instance, Cardinal Gugerotti had to say about this. But other than that, a way to show the displeasure with what he did is to say, hey, I'm not going to give you a slap in the hand. I'm going to give you a slap in the face. If it hurts you, it may hurt you. That's not my problem. Then you address that.
Let me add a point of information here. It's just a note. I wrote to the dicastery for Oriental Churches, Cardinal Gugerotti's department, asking him for a statement about what happened at the university, and if he could confirm that he said that. I wanted to be sure before quoting it in the letter. And strangely enough, the dicastery didn't respond, not the secretary of Cardinal Gugerotti. I got a response from the press department of the Pontifical Gregorian University, referring me to an article in the Italian press that quoted Cardinal Gugerotti, which I took to be confirmation that he indeed said that. I was able also to obtain a recording of his letter being read, so I was able to confirm that he did say that, what's quoted in the letter. But we sought clarification. And when I got the response from the press department of the university, I asked if they had any statement from the rector of the university, Father Mark
Lewis,
exactly. And they refused. They said there will be no further comments about that. So we sought a response from the Vatican before releasing the letter, and we got none.
Avedis, would you be able to send us a link to that letter in the Italian press? We will include it in the show notes if possible.
Yeah, of course.
If I may, I just wanted to add a different point, or going back to the beginning of this entire conversation, which is, of course, you see all sorts of opinions or views in the public sphere, which is social media these days, and of course you read, casually or not, comments about Armenians being very angry with the late Pope because of the photograph with the Aliyev couple, and what happened this and what happened that, and the policy of the Vatican, etc. I don't know about the inner workings of the Vatican, but I do believe that not necessarily the entire foreign policy of the Vatican goes through the hands of the pontiff. And of course, we don't know the inner workings of what they do, and how much of that is the responsibility of whom? So it is not very, and it has nothing to do with the fact that, the Pope happened to pass in these same days. But I do believe that we shouldn't start throwing mud on his stature as a leader by conflating necessarily all that he said with this episode, especially when we don't have all the facts in our hands. Certain things are public. We know that part that is public or that may show up in the near future. But at this point, to talk about, the Pope came to Armenia and he said genocide. But see what happened later.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that point. I think more than assigning personal fault, it's we are talking a little bit more about putting it in the context of a progression of relation between the Vatican in general and Azerbaijan.
Sorry, I understand your context, the need for context. I'm totally for it, and this was criticism leveled at, generally speaking, our people who are, of course, they are just,
That's rather reactionary.
Yes, but I just wanted to mention one little thing. Let's not forget that in 2016, when the Pope went to Armenia, and in 2015, actually, 2015, it was when he used the word genocide for the first time. But when he went to Armenia in 2016, a circle in the Vatican pushed strongly against him using the word genocide in Armenia. And he did it despite that. So that shows something. That
Absolutely.
The clock in the Vatican didn't go on the same time that Pope Francis' clock went, necessarily, not always. So there are things that we still don't know.
Yeah, the same happened with John Paul II, who did use the word genocide, but you had all the Vatican diplomacy pushing back very strongly against that. And I remember, because at the time I worked at CNN, and we got these conflicting cables coming from the Vatican and Yerevan about whether it was genocide or not, because there was all the Vatican operatives who were against that, pushing back. I wanted to bring up something that Vartan brought up. I'm not a Vaticanist by a long shot. That's how they call in Italy the experts in Vatican affairs, the journalists, Vaticanista. But I heard one of the criticisms, necessarily mild these days because he passed away, leveled against him is that he decentralized a lot of the operations in the Vatican, and there were too many freewheeling operations within it. So that's one of the criticisms leveled against him, that he was too decentralized and too many things were happening that were outside his oversight.
Vartan, just a quick question. I read here that you have an upcoming book,
Yes.
The Color of Choice. Can you give us a few words about it and just what should we wait for?
Yeah, this is not part of the conversation, right? Because it has nothing to do with it.
No.
Well, I mean,
well, actually, usually at the start of our shows, when it is the first time a guest is on our show, we do ask a little bit about you, but we just jumped into our topic, so we didn't get to actually get to know you, both you and Avedis.
And actually, of course, Avedis's book as well. We can probably have a show about that one day, but given that it's coming up, I thought I should mention it as people.
So this book, is about, the topic is very fashionable, I believe. This is about the issues of race and Armenians in the U.S. And in Germany before and during Nazism. In the U.S., as you know, after the Armenians started immigrating in the 1890s, they were part of this wave of immigration that was seen as being not enough white to become citizens and not having the the background to get the how to become American citizens.
Mm-hmm.
So this was part of the backlash against immigration that was going on from the 1890s, and it reached its peak in 1924 with the quota, 1921, 1924 with the quota laws that curtailed most. They basically forbade the immigration from Asia. Chinese was already forbidden. It happened also with the Japanese, etc., and curtail very much the immigration from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Western Asia, including Armenians. That's how, after 1924 until 1936, 1965, sorry, we had a total of basically 100 Armenians from Turkey, 100 Armenians, 230 from Russia, and 100 from Armenia proper in the list. So the immigration of Armenians to the United States was severely cut off for the next 40 years.
Vartan, what is the title of the book?
The Color of Choice, The Armenians and the Politics of Race in the United States and Germany, 1890-1945.
Let me add that I had the fortune of reading a manuscript. It's a book you can't put down. It's a really amazing read, so I strongly recommend it.
So I just wanted to add one more thing about the book. So then, and you have also the trials of the Hadjian case and the Cartosian case, when the Armenians had to prove that they were white in order to be able to allow to become citizens. And they won both cases, one in 1909, the second in 1924-25, and they ensuring their whiteness and their right to become citizens. Because as you know, until 1952, to being white was the free white person was the mantra, so someone could become an American citizen. That's one part of the book. The second part of the book is about Armenians being or not being considered Aryans in Germany and in other countries of Europe, but especially in Germany before the Hitler time and during the Nazi time until 1945, and the impact of that stuff in some of the allies and satellites of the Reich, including Italy, France, Romania, and a curious case of Croatia. So, and this is one chapter, the last chapter of the book. So this is basically what it is, and you can see the part of the United States is very much it's very much fashionable, unfortunately, these days. If you look at what's happening today, even though there is not a word about it, but you know, you can trace many parallels, and in an Armenian case, remember or recall a story that many people seem to have forgotten today.
That is great. When the book is out, we will put the link in these show notes, and then maybe we'll talk about it over a recording.
Hopefully, it should be out in July. It's coming out from Brill in Germany. It's the second book in a collection called Armenian History and Culture. The first book should be out very soon. It's a collection of articles about the genocide by several researchers at the Armenian Genocide Museum in Yerevan, and the second book is mine.
And Avedis, I have heard a lot of good words about your book as well, Secret Nation, The Hidden Armenians of Turkey. I haven't read it myself, but I definitely plan to get a copy.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Vartan and Avedis. We will talk again.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a great day.
Well, that's our show today. And we were recording, as we mentioned, on April 26, 2025. Today was the funeral of the Pope. He was laid to rest. We've been talking with Avedis Hadjian, who is a journalist and a writer based in Venice, Italy. His writings have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, Bloomberg News, and Le Monde Diplomatique, among other international news outlets. His work as a correspondent has taken him to Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union, China, the Caucasus, Turkey, and Latin America. He was educated in Buenos Aires and Cambridge, the United Kingdom. He is the author of Secret Nation, The Hidden Armenians of Turkey, which is about Armenians who live under different guises of assimilation in the historical Armenian provinces, Cilicia, and other regions of present-day Turkey.
And our other guest today was Dr. Vartan Matiossian. a scholar of Armenian history and literature, and executive director of the Eastern Prelacy of the Armenian Apostolic Church in New York. Born in Montevideo and raised in Buenos Aires, he earned his PhD in history from the National Academy of Sciences of Armenia, and he has published extensively in Armenian, Spanish, and English, including 10 books and numerous translations. His works in English include Armenian Language Matters, 2019, The Politics of Naming the Armenian Genocide, 2022, and with Artsakh, An Armenian Woman of the World, 2023. His upcoming book is The Color of Choice.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that book. Well, okay, for more information on any one of us and all of the stuff that we just read about the authors and our guests, you should visit the show notes, which are at podcasts.groong.org/episode number. I'm Asbed Bedrosian in Los Angeles.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan, also in Los Angeles temporarily.
Check out our show notes, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Please comment, like, share, help us out. Thanks.